Music Not Diving is brought to you by Acid Nation. What is Acid Nation? Well, it's a D2C platform, a direct-to-consumer platform. So if you're selling music as an artist or as a label, or if you're a music fan wanting to connect more directly with your favorite music people, well, then this is a great place for you. Acid Nation does a lot more than the average D2C in terms of extra services for labels and artists selling music. They have their own pressing plant, so if you're selling vinyl, they can take in your orders, press up the records and ship them straight back to the customer, because they also have a fulfillment service, so you don't have to do anything on that score. Pretty amazing. They also have a streaming service built into the platform that pays out the mythical 1 cent per stream, just a payment of 1 cent per stream, no pro rata stuff or anything like the big streaming players. That's absolutely brilliant. We use Acid Nation for all of our stuff on my label, Hot Flush Recordings, and we couldn't recommend them highly enough. So head over to acidnation.com to check them out.
This is Music Not Diving with Scuba.
Welcome to the show. I'm Scuba. This is Music Not Diving. Okay, something a bit different on the show this week. We're going to try and answer some questions. Yeah, I posted or reposted a podcast that I recorded initially a couple of years ago called The End of Recorded Music, in which I was talking about basically the coming AI debate. Actually, I was trying to set the table for then what I was anticipating was going to be a series of conversations about AI in music and about the way musicians perceive AI and also other technology developments too. And, you know, that was, I suppose, prescient because AI in the subsequent couple of years has come to basically dominate everything. As Emilio, come to dominate basically everything in politics and popular culture, in just about basically every conversation in the public sphere that people have. AI is absolutely there. And I was talking about it, I suppose, in that podcast in the context of art and whether popular culture really is art, and dance music and where it sits in popular culture, how much is that art? And how much do we consider ourselves as musicians, artists, in a way which is probably not accurate, maybe, or at least that's what I posited in that conversation anyway. And that really got a lot of people, got people going. You know, it yanks people's chains when you talk about art, because everyone has their own definition of it. And I think that's the problem. You know, the philosophy of art, going all the way back to Plato, you know, is the philosophy, well, it's a story of the different definitions that people have over time of what art is. So I was talking about that in that podcast, and, you know, in the context of hopefully some conversations that we're going to be having on the podcast coming up over the course of this year. So actually, I thought I'd take this opportunity to talk a little bit more about those things, some of the questions that came out of that podcast in today's episode, because, you know, we had Sister Bliss from Faithless on the show last week. We didn't really get into that stuff with her, and actually the next couple of episodes we've got coming up, we don't really get into it either. So, you know, just to kind of put my money where my mouth is on this kind of stuff, let's talk about it a bit today. And then there will be some episodes coming up in the coming weeks and months where we get into that in a bit more detail.
Brought to you by acidnation.com.
So today, questions. I've got a list of notes down here. So if I look down there, that's what I'm doing. Is the model of the DJ producer fundamentally broken? The legend of the dance producer, I think, well, yeah, there is a legend to it, right? It's the one guy in his bedroom making tunes, making this amazing music. And it usually was a guy, by the way, almost always was a guy. Certainly in the legend, it was a guy making tunes in his bedroom and then playing them out at the weekend. And that was kind of the reward. And it also informed the art, in quotation marks, informed the output too. And one of the things that's happened over the course of the last few years is that there has been a breakdown between the making of tunes and the getting of gigs, as it were. So basically, to get gigs now, you've got to have a massive social media following. You've got to be a very marketable person. And that's how you gain a following, because basically communication is done via social media. So people get to know people get to know acts through that medium. And so it makes complete sense. It's not a conspiracy or anything, I don't think. It's just a natural reaction or a natural consequence of this method of communication. But what that means is music becomes less important, basically. So you are rewarded less for being musically interesting, being musically innovative. The more important thing is how you look, it's how you project yourself, it's how you perform on stage, it's the ability of your DJ sets to produce good short form video content. And that means that, great producers don't get as many gigs. And, there's a kind of tendency to sort of blame, there's a kind of, the cliched of blaming the female DJs for, taking the gigs of the older dudes. And, obviously that's mostly nonsense. I say mostly nonsense because there is some degree of truth to it, because there has been, a high degree of positive discrimination in favor of female DJs. And, you can debate whether that's a good thing or not. But I mean, that's certainly been a factor. But the more important factor really is just that the market as it's set up now rewards marketability more than musical innovation, basically. And promoters, as we've often talked about on the show, and venues are under unbelievable pressure. Incredible pressure, like unprecedented pressure in the history of the dance scene, like, cost inflation, the ability of prices, or the tendency of prices just to go up and up and up. And without disposable income necessarily matching it, or definitely not matching it. So there's only a certain amount you can put up. Ticket prices, ticket prices have gone up, but like really not in a way that matches costs. And that's basically because the consumer isn't earning sufficiently more money to bear what should be the correct cost increases in ticket prices. So we've got a fundamental problem, basically. And it's a problem which has affected the relationship between making music and DJing. And that, I think, that DJ producer paradigm was really what powered the best era of dance music, or the era of dance music which produced the most innovation, the most interesting music, the biggest tunes, the best tunes. And, we've often remarked on the show that there aren't any anthems anymore. There's a lot of good tunes, but there's not a ton of era-defining or summer-defining anthems like there used to be. And there's lots of different reasons for that. But this is certainly a consequence. There's a lot of safe music being made, being put out, a lot of ghost-written music, frankly, being put out, which serves a purpose, and that purpose is basically to lend credibility to the DJs who are getting the gigs as a result of their marketability. So this is it is a serious problem, absolutely. And is it a fundamental breakdown? I think it might be. I think the other thing is everyone in the creative industries are struggling to make money. Like the freelancer in almost any area, like they're really struggling, and no more than the musician. And what do you have to do as a musician? You have to try and find other revenue streams. Me doing this podcast is an example of that, actually. But actually, quite a lot of the time, these revenue streams are not palatable to the audience. And a really good example of this actually is how shall I put this? I don't know if you can mention that site where people post explicit photos of themselves in exchange for money. It begins with an OF. I'm not going to name it explicitly, but I think this is a really good example of that, because it's an extremely lucrative path for some people. And you see athletes doing it, you see different people in different areas doing it, and you absolutely see musicians doing it too. And people, mostly dudes, tend not to react to it very well. So I'm thinking of one example specifically. There's a DJ producer who I'm not going to name her, but she's been on my radar basically because she makes some really interesting music, and actually she works a really interesting visual aesthetic, but her personal image, if I can put it that way, is very much part of that aesthetic. And she's got on her Instagram page, this is the link you're looking for, that one. And it's there. And it's obviously a big part of how she makes a living, because, it's basically impossible at this point to, certainly to make a living from music, but very difficult from shows too, because there are fewer shows to go around, and B, far more DJs competing for those shows. So this kind of secondary revenue stream is an absolute classic one. And someone in her position, you can absolutely understand why she would do it. But she gets all kinds of blowback for it, as you can imagine. And she was posting yesterday, about how basically just highlighting the blowback she gets. And then today, as I was recording this, posted up, a lot of the supportive messages that she'd received as a result of, highlighting the criticism she was getting. But this really struck me, because as musicians, we are beholden to our audience. You have to know your audience. And when what you do artistically doesn't fit with the expectations of that audience, it's a really difficult circle to square. So this is really, really difficult stuff, I think. And the paradigm of trying to make money out of music is that was a real kind of motivating factor for me starting this podcast in the first place 4 years ago or so. What I really wanted to do, one of the big things I wanted to do was try and help people trying to get into it with the process of how to do it for a living. Because, I mean, it is such a challenge, you know? And the breakdown between tunes and music and the challenges that people face in developing extra revenue streams is, I mean, it's extraordinarily tough. Is it fundamentally broken? I think maybe it is. Certainly something has got to change. Something very big has got to change to get to a point where the people that make the best dance music, just talking about dance music, are the ones that are rewarded the best, or at least more consistently than they are now. It's extremely tough, and I think something needs to change to make it happen. Okay, next one. What have we got? How do you view the ethics of AI in music? This is one I think which is, it's so interesting because there is no clear and set, there's no one way of using AI. I think now it's got to the point where when people think about AI, it's clicking generate on Suno and it spits out a finished track and you upload it to Spotify. Certainly in, you know, the people that I talk to, the conversations that I have, people are scared, really scared. They're freaked out about that completely. And that's completely understandable. But it's also quite a small part of what AI is in music. And when we talk about AI, I think that's the assumption. But really, it's built into so many of the programs that we use now, like plugins in DAWs, in, you know, various different things that we use to support releases, you know, in artwork. There's so many different facets to it. And I think basically when people complain about it, they're complaining about two different things. They're complaining about, first of all, cheating in the process of making music. That's the kind of Suno thing. Like, you know, as the Suno CEO said, I think music apparently isn't fun to make anymore. So it's much better just to push a button and see what comes out. And I think to people who have been making music for a long time and take the process of making music seriously and enjoy the process of making music, that's an awful thing to say. So there's that. And I think that's totally legit. But then there's also the other side of it, which is just the ethics of using a model, any kind of model, which has been trained on other people's work. And that's a very different thing. It's a very different complaint, I think, but it's just as problematic morally. And I think people are, certainly the conversations I have with musicians, people are much more sanguine about the latter than the former. I mean, people have basically almost no problem, many people anyway, of, you know, using AI to work up a vocal line or whatever, or just to make a vocal, or, you know, to make some drums or whatever, one of these programs, or using Stemverter, for example, to extract stems. I use that, absolutely. I have, you know, very little problem with it ethically. But actually, when you think about it, all of these models have been trained on data and on work which has been previously done by people who are not being compensated for it. So this is a problem, and a big problem. And I think that particular one, the latter thing that I've just been describing, is one which is not taken anywhere near seriously enough by musicians. And I think that really needs to change if the conversation is to move on. I mean, there are people who, well, there is a kind of online debate going on Twitter between people like Matt Dryhurst and Holly Herndon, on the one hand arguing in favor of AI, and then Ed Newton Rex, for example, on the other, very much arguing in favor of regulation, arguing in favor of much more specific compensation for people whose data has been used to train these models. Actually, I mean, Holly Herndon, interestingly, came out very publicly this week in favor, against Bandcamp's statement where they are going to ban AI music and sort of have a almost a kind of like Cultural Revolution style. You can dob people in if you suspect they're using AI. I mean, that's a little bit of a problematic way of doing it, I think, generally speaking. But interesting that Holly was willing to come out very strongly and say, actually, no, artistically, this is essential, great art, in her opinion, is being made using these tools. So I think this is an extraordinarily complex debate, and it gets, I think, reduced down too often to Suno's bad, AI is bad. And I think there's a kind of like upswelling of opinion, generally speaking, in society now that, you know, AI is bad. People are bored of it. People have had a bad experience using ChatGPT or whatever. It's got something wrong. That means it must be rubbish. And, you know, the whole thing is charlatanry. And there's so many news stories, you know, about the AI bubble in the stock market and all the rest of it. But I mean, this is, I think, well, it's a simplification, of course. And I don't think it's helpful in really getting to the bottom of what all this stuff really means. And particularly for musicians, right? I mean, the tech debate in music is something that we've had, I think, on the show over the course of a few years. One of the most interesting episodes that we ever did was with Robert Henker, one of the founders of Ableton. And I asked him straight out, you know, is the avalanche of bad music that Ableton has enabled, is that worth it for, you know, the existence of a tool which helps so much great music be made? You know, because I think that's a reasonable, you know, question to ask. It's not completely clear to me that it is, but to him it was clear. To him, it absolutely is worth it to have this avalanche of nonsense, because, you know, the utility of a tool like Ableton is such that, well, as I said, it enables the good stuff to be made too. I mean, I've, you know, commented on the show many times that for me, the problem is distribution. It's not these tools. It's not AI music. It's none of those things. It's the fact that companies like DistroKid and many others have enabled, and actually Suno does this too, have enabled all of this awful music, which, you know, in years gone by would never have been able to have been released. It enables it to be, you know, sitting on these US DSPs in exactly the same way and with exactly the same, you know, prominence as the Beatles. You know, I mean, that to me is the issue, far more than any of this tech stuff. But from an ethical perspective, you know, going back to those two things, is it cheating to use a program like Suno? Yeah, absolutely it is. It totally is, in my opinion. It's completely unethical. It makes a mockery of the idea that music is art, you know, to go back to that loaded term. Like, of course it's not. Absolute nonsense. And, you know, the ethics on the other hand of using models which have been trained, I'm more on the side, I think, overall of the idea that more protection should be given to people whose work has been used. I think the idea that the horse is already bolted and nothing we can do about it, I think, you know, Web 2.0 basically suffered from that approach. Basically, it's already done, we can't regulate it. And I think that the problems that social media has caused in society is basically a result of that kind of, you know, throwing your hands up and, you know, basically giving up, you know, at the regulatory level. I don't think that's doable in AI. I think it's too important, basically, to make that mistake again. And we can't do it. We really can't. I hope we don't. I think we probably will, though, because, you know, governments are useless, frankly. And, you know, the government in a certain country in the world is even worse than useless. Anyway, I've gone on longer than I thought this was going to take. I had a couple more, but maybe I'll save this for a later one of these. We're going to try and do these a little bit more regularly. But yeah, this has been fun. If you enjoyed it, then of course, like the video, subscribe to the channel, all of that good stuff. You can support us on Patreon as well if you want. scubaofficial.com/support is the place to go for all the links for, you know, the different ways you can support us. You can bung us a one-off donation as well if you so desire. Patreon's good though, because you can get basically what is a Bandcamp subscription actually as part of the higher tier of that, which is just $10 a month. So pretty good value. Anyway, I hope you're enjoying the podcast. I'm going to try and do more of these solo ones. Normally in the past when I've done solo podcasts, I've done them just on the mic and then chopped them up. And I've tried to do this to camera in one take, and I haven't done it quite in one take. You'll have noticed there's going to be little chops and edits, but it's a challenge. But this whole podcasting thing has been a challenge. Anyway, this has been Music Not Diving. I've been Scuba. I'll see you next week for the next episode. Thank you.
Music Not Diving with Scuba.